Welcome back, you night owls. Tonight we are going to dim the lights, turn down the world's volume, and step into a different kind of darkness. A darkness not of monsters and ghosts, but of secrets and rituals. A hidden history whispered in the shadows of feudal Japan. You're drifting now, aren't you? The soft glow of your screen is the only light, the hum of your fan the only sound, as we slip back into an era of strict codes, breathtaking art, and some practices that will absolutely make you question how anyone survived the sheer awkwardness, let alone the terror. This is not for the faint of heart, and you probably won't survive the emotional rollercoaster this journey will take you on. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're up for it, drop a comment with your location and local time, so we can all feel a little less alone in the quiet of our own nights. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing in the twilight of the 17th century, a low-ranking noble perhaps, or a merchant with a bit of pull. The air is thick with the scent of pine and something else, something cloying and expensive, like a mix of incense and rare oils. You're approaching the shogun's palace, not through the grand public gates, but through a discreet side entrance. This is the uku, the great interior, a labyrinthine world of concubines, ladies-in-waiting, and eunuchs, a fortress within a fortress where 1,000 women lived and breathed solely for the shogun's pleasure and dynastic succession. The shogun, remember, was the military dictator of Japan, the true power behind the emperor's ceremonial throne. His life was one of immense privilege and even greater paranoia. The uku wasn't just a pleasure dome, it was a political machine, a gilded cage where the most beautiful and well-bred women in Japan were housed. Your own little sister might have been chosen, a great honour for your family, but one that came with an ironclad set of rules. Once she stepped through those gates, she was gone. She could never leave. Her life, her hopes, her very identity were subsumed into the shogun's household. It's a bit like joining a particularly exclusive and inescapable social club where the only purpose is to catch the eye of one very powerful, very busy man. The rules of this place were mind-bogglingly complex. The women were arranged in a strict hierarchy, from the highest-ranking concubines to the lowest scullery maids. The number of concubines was not a matter of a simple personal preference, it was a matter of state. A shogun needed to produce an heir, and if his primary wife failed, the concubines were there to pick up the slack. They were seen as a form of human safeguard for the continuity of the shogunate. Imagine the pressure. You're a young woman, perhaps 16 or 17, and your entire family's future status and fortune rest on whether you can give birth to a strong male heir. It wasn't about love or affection, it was a high-stakes matter of lineage and survival. The shogun's evening visits were conducted with strict ritual and formality. A senior lady-in-waiting, known as the toshiori, would present a carefully selected list of court women. The shogun would make his choice, and the selected companion would be respectfully prepared, bathed, perfumed, and dressed according to tradition. This wasn't some casual or romantic encounter. It was a structured, almost bureaucratic process. The companion would be escorted, often by a group of attendants, to the shogun's private quarters. The shogun himself would remain in a separate chamber, and the companion would approach him by crawling on hands and knees to a designated spot. This gesture wasn't meant to demean, but rather to symbolize deference, an unmistakable reflection of the hierarchical nature of court life. Historians still argue whether the shogun had true emotional connections with any of these women. Some scholars believe it was purely a transactional relationship, a means to an end, while others suggest that, within the strict confines of the uku, genuine affection could and did blossom. But the system itself was designed to prevent any single woman from gaining too much power or influence over the shogun. The uku was a political tool, and its inhabitants were pieces on a chessboard, their every move watched and recorded. A quirky detail? The shogun's chambers were always guarded by female samurai, the onobugisha, and male eunuchs. The idea was to prevent any plots or assassinations. The women were seen as less likely to betray the shogun, and the eunuchs, being unable to father children, couldn't be used by rival factions to produce a claimant to the throne. It's a fascinating reflection of the paranoia that pervaded the shogunate. The shogun trusted no one completely, not even his family, and so he surrounded himself with a bizarre human shield of marginalized and powerless people. The most bizarre and perhaps horrific custom was the omeshiage, the process of a woman being chosen for a night with the shogun. It was a formal, almost theatrical production. The woman would be led to the shogun's room, but she wasn't allowed to enter directly. She would wait in an antechamber, and a chamberlain would go in and announce her arrival. When the shogun was ready, he would give a signal, and the woman would be brought in, again on her knees. This was all a part of a larger performance of power and dominance, a way to reinforce his absolute authority. It's also deeply impersonal, isn't it? The very act of intimacy, something we see as personal and private, was transformed into a public, ritualized demonstration of power. The women of the Uku lived in a strange bubble. They were surrounded by luxury, pampered with fine silks and exquisite food, but they were prisoners. They were not allowed to see their families, and their children, if they had any with the shogun, were often raised by others within the Uku, further severing the natural bonds of motherhood. The only time a woman could leave was upon the death of the shogun, and even then she would be sent to a nunnery, her life of service and confinement continuing in a different form. It's a tragic story, really, of 1,000 lost souls living in golden cages, their lives defined by the whims of a single, all-powerful man. As the shogun's pleasure palaces fade into the evening mist, you find yourself trudging through the rain-slicked streets of a different kind of pleasure district. The air here is less refined, thick, with the scent of cheap sake, grilled eel, and 1,000 different perfumes. You've arrived in the Yoshiwara, the famed pleasure quarter of Edo, a city within a city, separated from the rest of the world by a moat and a single guarded gate. This wasn't some back-alley den of iniquity. It was a highly organised, heavily regulated and surprisingly rigid social ecosystem, a place where art, commerce, and a very particular kind of intimacy collided. To call the women of the Yoshiwara prostitutes is a bit like calling a shogun a mere soldier. It misses the nuance and the incredibly strict hierarchy that governed every aspect of their lives. At the top of this pyramid were the oiran, the highest-ranking courtesans. These were the superstars, the divas, the living works of art. An oiran was not just beautiful, she was a master of a dozen different arts. She could compose poetry, play the shamisen, perform the tea ceremony, and engage in witty, intellectual conversation with the most powerful men in Japan. It was considered a great honour just to be in her presence, and to spend a night with one required a small fortune, weeks of courtship, and the approval of the oiran herself. You couldn't just walk up to her and demand her time. It was a courtship ritual, a complex dance of power and respect. You see an oiran now walking in a procession down the main street. She's wearing a breathtakingly elaborate kimono, layers of silk and gold that must weigh 100 pounds, and her hair is an architectural masterpiece, adorned with dozens of ornate hairpins, the kanzashi. She walks with a distinctive shuffle, the hachimonji walk, on impossibly high platform sandals, a stylized, deliberate movement that takes years to perfect. Her attendants, the younger courtesans in training, walk alongside her, holding umbrellas and carrying her train. It's not just a walk, it's a performance, a moving tableau that freezes the street in awe. Below the oiran were a multitude of other courtesans, each with their own rank and set of skills. The taiyu were just below the oiran, still incredibly skilled and expensive. Then you had the kosho, younger girls in training, and the kamuro, child attendants who served the higher-ranking courtesans. At the very bottom were the hashijoro, women who served the lowest-ranking clientele. Each tier had its own dress code, its own rules, and its own price. It was a meticulously ordered world where everyone knew their place and the path to advancement was long, arduous, and rarely reached. A mainstream historical fact you might find surprising. The Yoshiwara was not just tolerated, but actively managed by the shogunate. It was seen as a necessary evil, a pressure valve for the male population. By concentrating all this activity in one place, the authorities could keep an eye on it, tax it, and prevent it from spilling out into the general population. It was a fascinating paradox. A place of supposedly wild abandon that was, in reality, a heavily regulated bureaucratic institution. Historians still argue whether the Yoshiwara was a prison or a unique kind of opportunity for women who, in a patriarchal society, might have had few other options. Some scholars see it as a place of immense exploitation, while others highlight the stories of women who, through their wit and talent, managed to buy their freedom and live a comfortable life afterwards. The life of a courtesan, even a high-ranking one, was not glamorous. They were often sold into the Yoshiwara by poor families, and their debt to the house was constantly growing. They were trapped, their freedom a prize they could only win through immense success. A quirky detail of this world. The Yoshiwara had its own unique language and customs. For example, a man who visited a courtesan was called a yurit, and he would be served tea and sweet cakes upon arrival. The first few visits were not for intimacy, but for conversation and getting to know each other. The ultimate goal was to impress the courtesan enough that she would deem you worthy of her time. It was a power dynamic that subverted the usual social norms, a little island where the women held the cards, at least for a little while. The art and culture that emerged from the Yoshiwara are a huge part of its legacy. The ukiyo-e, or pictures of the floating world, are a perfect example. These woodblock prints depicting beautiful courtesans, kabuki actors, and scenes of daily life in the pleasure quarters were the pop culture of the Edo period. They were the celebrity magazines of their day, a way for people outside the Yoshiwara to glimpse the glamorous, unattainable world within. You can see one now in a shop window, a print of a famous oiran, her face a serene mask, her kimono a riot of colour and pattern. It's beautiful, isn't it? But remember the pain and confinement that went into its creation. The Yoshiwara was also a place of rules, some of them frankly absurd. Courtesans were forbidden from wearing certain colours or patterns reserved for the wives of samurai. They had to speak in a specific stylized manner. They were not allowed to be seen outside the district. Even when a courtesan was sick, she was not allowed to leave for fear of spreading disease to the outside world. It was a quarantine, a social quarantine as much as a medical one. This isolation, combined with the intense competition and constant pressure to be perfect, made the Yoshiwara a mentally and physically taxing environment. You watch as a young man, a merchant like yourself, stumbles out of a tea house, his purse no doubt significantly lighter. He looks dazed, a little drunk, but with a dreamy smile on his face. He's just had an audience with a tayu, and he's probably spent his entire month's earnings on the privilege. This was the economy of the Yoshiwara, a constant flow of money from men who wanted to escape the strictures of their own lives, if only for a night. The women, in turn, were caught in a system that promised them a way out, but often only delivered more beautiful chains. It's a tragic story, but one that also produced some of the most enduring art and literature of the era. The Yoshiwara was a place of darkness and light, of exploitation and incredible resilience. You pull your collar tight as the rain starts to fall harder, washing the streets clean, but leaving the memories and the whispers of 1,000 secrets behind. Leaving the rain-soaked streets of the Yoshiwara behind, you find yourself on a quiet, sun-dappled path leading to a samurai's estate. The air here is clean and cool, smelling of manicured gardens and polished wood. You're entering a world of immense discipline, strict codes of honour, and a sexual morality that was, to put it mildly, deeply contradictory. The samurai were the warrior class, the moral and political backbone of feudal Japan, and their lives were governed by a rigid code, the Bushido, or the way of the warrior. But like all human codes, Bushido had its strange and often hypocritical exceptions, especially when it came to matters of the heart and the bedroom. The primary duty of a samurai was to serve his lord and to produce a male heir to carry on the family name and legacy. This singular focus on lineage meant that all intimacy, even within a marriage, was viewed through the lens of duty and procreation. A samurai's wife was not a romantic partner in the modern sense. She was the mother of his future heirs, the manager of his household, and a symbol of his family's status. Romantic love was seen as a dangerous distraction, a weakness that could compromise a warrior's resolve. This is a mainstream historical fact that completely inverts our modern notions of marriage. But here's where it gets really interesting. While samurai were expected to be stoic and disciplined in their public lives, their private lives were often anything but. A quirky tidbit of samurai life was the practice of virginal tests. Before a high-ranking samurai took a wife, she was often subjected to a physical examination by an older, trusted female family member to confirm her purity. This was a brutal and dehumanizing practice, but it was seen as a necessary step to ensure the legitimacy of the future heir. The honour of the entire family rested on this one terrible moment. It's a stark reminder that while samurai may have preached a code of honour and respect, that code often didn't extend to the women in their lives. Perhaps the most fascinating contradiction in samurai sexual customs was the widespread acceptance of Shudo, or the way of the youth, a form of male-on-male affection. This was not a fringe, hidden practice, but a deeply ingrained and celebrated part of samurai culture. An older, experienced samurai, the ninja, would take a younger samurai, the wakaju, under his wing. The relationship was a mentorship, a bond of loyalty and affection that was often seen as stronger and purer than any relationship with a woman. The ninja would teach the wakaju the martial arts, the codes of honour, and the ways of the world. In return, the wakaju would offer loyalty, affection, and often sexual intimacy. This relationship was not seen as a challenge to a samurai's masculinity. On the contrary, it was seen as a way to forge a stronger, more disciplined warrior. The intense emotional and physical bond was thought to be a training ground for the loyalty a samurai was expected to show his lord. Historians still argue whether these relationships were primarily about platonic mentorship or if the sexual component was always central. Some scholars believe that Shudo was a necessary outlet for men who were taught to suppress all emotion in their dealings with women, while others suggest it was a direct subversion of the samurai's patriarchal society, a way for men to find emotional intimacy without the burden of procreation. You see a pair of samurai now walking side by side. One is a seasoned veteran, his face a roadmap of old scars, and the other is a fresh-faced youth, barely old enough to wield a sword. The older samurai places a hand on the younger's shoulder, a gesture of affection that is both paternal and something else. You feel a wave of confusion, a clash of cultures that is hard to reconcile. How can a society that demands a physical purity test for its women so openly celebrate this other form of intimacy? The samurai's wife, meanwhile, was relegated to the domestic sphere. Her domain was the household, and her power was derived from her ability to manage it well and to produce heirs. She was expected to be a bastion of virtue, a silent partner in her husband's life, and her emotional needs were often completely ignored. This is not to say that she was a powerless victim. Many samurai wives wielded considerable influence within the household, and a few, like the legendary Onabu geisha, female samurai, even trained in martial arts and fought alongside their male counterparts. But for the vast majority, life was a cycle of duty and confinement. The samurai's life was a delicate balance of public duty and private desires. A samurai could have concubines, and it was considered an acceptable practice, as long as the primary wife was given her due respect and a male heir was produced. It was a pragmatic approach to intimacy, a recognition that a man's needs might not be met by a single, dutiful wife. But a woman's infidelity, a furin, was considered a capital crime, an unforgivable offence that threatened the very fabric of the family and the legitimacy of the bloodline. The double standard was breathtaking in its audacity. You watch as a young samurai, a Hatamoto, direct retainer of the shogun, leaves his estate. He's dressed impeccably, his sword gleaming in the afternoon sun. He's on his way to a meeting, but you know, by the way he furtively glances down the street, that he's also planning a detour. Perhaps to see a favourite courtesan in a lesser pleasure district, or perhaps to meet with his wakashu. The samurai's world was a tapestry of conflicting desires and duties, a place where honour and hypocrisy, stoicism and passion existed side by side in a tense and often violent harmony. It's a world that defies easy explanation, a place where you have to peel back the layers of rigid code to find the messy, contradictory humanity underneath. The sun sets, casting long, dramatic shadows across the samurai's estate, and you realise that behind every polished facade there's always a hidden story waiting to be told. The sun now dips below the horizon, and you find yourself leaving the samurai's well-ordered estate for a much quieter, more sombre setting. The hallowed grounds of a Buddhist monastery. The air here is cool and still, thick with the scent of old wood and burning incense. You hear the rhythmic chanting of a sutra and the distant sonorous ring of a temple bell. This is a place of spiritual discipline, where monks and priests dedicate their lives to a path of enlightenment, which, by its very nature, demands celibacy. But like so many strictures in human history, this vow was often honoured more in the breach than in the observance. A core tenet of Buddhist monastic life in feudal Japan was the renunciation of worldly pleasures, and chief among them was sexual desire, which was seen as a major obstacle to achieving spiritual freedom. Monks were expected to live a life of strict celibacy, dedicating their bodies and minds to prayer, meditation, and study. This is a mainstream historical fact, a foundational principle that shaped the spiritual landscape of the era. The monastery was supposed to be an oasis of purity and detachment, a place where the messy, carnal world was left at the gates. But human nature, as you know, is a persistent and often unruly thing. The reality behind the serene temple walls was often much more complex. A quirky tidbit from this period is the widespread practice of kagemai, a form of clandestine dancing and entertainment performed by young boys in the monasteries. These young acolytes, or chigo, were often chosen for their beauty and trained in music and dance. They would perform for the older monks and visiting dignitaries. While kagemai was officially a form of religious art, it often had a much more intimate and sometimes sexual component. The relationships between older monks and these chigo were a well-known, if unspoken, part of monastic life. This was not just a quiet secret. It was, in many cases, a recognised social structure. Historians still argue whether these relationships were a form of exploitation, or if they were seen as a kind of spiritual apprenticeship. Some scholars believe that the chigo, much like the wakashu in samurai culture, were learning not just the performing arts, but also the delicate dance of power and patronage, and that the sexual aspect was simply a part of that larger bond. Others see it as a clear abuse of power, a way for older, more powerful monks to indulge their desires under the guise of religious mentorship. You can almost see it now. A young chigo, his face painted, his delicate robes shimmering in the candlelight, dancing for a group of solemn-faced monks. The air is heavy with a strange mix of devotion and desire, a tension that crackles just beneath the surface. It's a fascinatingly contradictory world, where the very institutions that upheld strict ideals of purity were often the stage for their most notable deviations. This wasn't just about breaches of discipline among monks. Their vows of celibacy were also tested by the presence of women. Despite efforts to maintain strict separation, some temples included nuns or female attendants. Though these connections were highly discouraged and considered inappropriate, they were not entirely uncommon. Stories of monks and nuns forming secret emotional bonds, often ending in sorrow, became popular themes in plays and literature of the period. The forbidden nature of these relationships captured the public's imagination, much like a dramatic series unfolding within temple walls. Human emotion and restraint clashed vividly in a space meant for spiritual stillness. The Shinto tradition, with its emphasis on life, continuity and fertility, added another layer of complexity to the Buddhist practice of celibacy. While Buddhism was the dominant religion of the elite and the intellectual classes, Shinto was the faith of the common people, with its shrines dedicated to the gods of harvest, fertility and family. The two religions often coexisted and blended, creating a unique spiritual landscape. A monk might spend his days meditating on the impermanence of all things, only to participate in a Shinto fertility ritual at a local shrine. It's a hilarious, beautiful contradiction. The human impulse to live, to procreate, and to celebrate the body was so strong that even the most ascetic religious institutions couldn't completely suppress it. The very landscape of the monastery itself sometimes reflected these hidden desires. The beautiful, manicured gardens, with their phallic rock arrangements and their flowing water, were not just symbols of spiritual purity. They were also, for some, a kind of sublimated eroticism, a way of expressing a desire for beauty and life that they were forbidden to experience directly. It's like the monastery itself was a silent, beautiful scream of human longing. The consequences for a monk who was caught breaking his vow of celibacy could be severe. He could be exiled, publicly shamed, or even killed. But the strictness of the punishment often led to a culture of secrecy and cover-ups. The monastic leadership was often willing to turn a blind eye to these transgressions, as long as they remained a quiet internal matter. The reputation of the monastery was paramount, and a scandal could bring ruin to the entire institution. It's a classic case of an organisation valuing its public image over its stated principles. You remember that crocodile dung sunscreen from our last chat? This is the spiritual equivalent, a desperate, often messy attempt to keep up appearances. You walk past a small, secluded temple, and through a window you see an old monk. His face a web of wrinkles, a testament to a lifetime of devotion. But as you watch, a young chigo comes in and kneels before him, not with a bowl for alms, but with a cup of tea. The monk's face, for a brief moment, softens into something that is not just paternal, but deeply affectionate. you realise that the lines between spiritual devotion, mentorship, and love were often blurred in this strange and secretive world. The monastery was a place of peace and a place of passion, a contradiction that makes feudal Japan so endlessly fascinating. As the final notes of the temple bell fade into the night, you are left with the silence and the knowledge that the human heart in all its messy complexity will always find a way. We leave the hushed confines of the monastery and step into a different kind of quiet. This is the interior of a scholar's home, the air filled with the scent of ink and aged paper. The only sound is the gentle rustle of a page being turned. You're looking at a shunga, an erotic picture from the Edo period, often collected in a pillow book. These weren't just dirty pictures, they were a unique and fascinating art form that reflected and shaped the sexual landscape of feudal Japan. The term pillow book is a bit of a misnomer, or at least a playful one. It suggests something hidden and private, a secret treasure to be enjoyed in the quiet intimacy of one's own bed. While they certainly served that purpose, these books were also a form of high art, often created by some of the most celebrated artists of the time, like Hokusai and Utamaro. A mainstream historical fact is that shunga were not considered shameful or pornographic, in the way that we might think of them today. They were a recognised and accepted genre of art, and they were often given as wedding presents to young couples to help them learn about intimacy. They were, in essence, a visual sex education manual. A quirky tidbit about these books is that they often depicted people of all social classes and professions, from high-ranking samurai to humble farmers, and even Buddhist monks and nuns. This was a form of social satire, a way for artists to gently poke fun at the rigid hierarchies of the time by showing that, under the covers, everyone was pretty much the same. The humour in these illustrations is often subtle, with a monk's serious face contrasting with his very unserious position, or a samurai's stiff armour lying in a discarded heap on the floor. It was a way of saying, look, all these rules and rituals, they don't matter when you're in the throes of passion. It's a very Japanese way of making a political statement, with a wink and a smile rather than an angry protest. Historians still argue whether the shunga truly reflected the reality of sexual practices at the time, or if they were a form of idealised fantasy. Some scholars believe that the exaggerated proportions and fantastical scenarios were a way of creating a world of pure pleasure, a kind of escapist fantasy for a people living under very strict social rules. Others suggest that the detailed illustrations are a valuable historical record, a window into the actual practices and customs of the time, a kind of visual ethnography of the bedroom. The truth, as is often the case, probably lies somewhere in the middle. The art was both a mirror and a fantasy, reflecting what was and what could be. You're looking at a shunga now, a single sheet from a larger collection. It shows a courtesan and a samurai. The details are exquisite. The delicate folds of their kimonos, the intricate patterns on the screen behind them, the expressiveness of their faces. The artist has captured not just the physical act, but the emotions surrounding it, the passion, the tenderness, the playful abandon. It's not a cold, clinical depiction. It's alive with feeling. The use of colour is particularly striking, with vibrant reds and blues contrasting with the subtle shades of the background. It's beautiful, isn't it? It's a reminder that even in a world of strict rules and rigid social classes, the human desire for beauty and connection could not be contained. The pillow books weren't just for men either. Women, especially in the merchant class, would often own them. These books served a dual purpose for them. They were a source of pleasure, of course, but they were also a kind of practical guide. With arranged marriages being the norm, a young woman might not have much experience or knowledge about intimacy before her wedding night. The shunga served as a kind of silent visual mentor, teaching her about the mechanics and, just as importantly, the emotions of intimacy. It's a hilarious thought, isn't it? A young bride-to-be, nervously flipping through a beautifully illustrated book, trying to prepare herself for her new life. The shunga also often depicted same-sex relationships, a testament to the wider acceptance of shudo and other forms of non-traditional intimacy. The images of two samurai or two courtesans in a moment of passionate embrace are just as common as the depictions of a man and a woman. This wasn't seen as scandalous or taboo. It was just another part of the rich tapestry of human experience. It's another example of how much more open and fluid the concepts of sexuality were in feudal Japan than they were in the West at the time. The shunga's influence wasn't limited to the bedroom. The art style and themes spilled over into other forms of popular culture, from theatrical plays to poetry. The imagery of the floating world, of courtesans and actors and passionate lovers, became a central part of the Japanese aesthetic. The shunga, in a strange and beautiful way, made intimacy a part of public art, bringing what was often hidden and private out into the light. It was a celebration of the body and its desires, a kind of artistic rebellion against the stoicism and repression of the samurai class. You gently close the book, the scent of old paper clinging to your fingers. You're left with a sense of wonder and a new understanding of this complex era. The pillow books were more than just erotic art. They were a cultural artifact, a reflection of a society that was at once deeply conservative and surprisingly liberal. They were a space where the rules could be broken, where social boundaries could be erased, and where human desire in all its messy and beautiful forms could be celebrated. You turn off your lamp, the room plunging into darkness, but the images from the pillow book linger in your mind, a testament to the enduring power of art to tell the truth about who we are. Leaving the silent, scholarly world of the pillow books behind, you trudge down a muddy, unpaved road. The scent of ink and old paper is replaced by the earthy smell of wet soil and wood smoke. You've left the refined world of the samurai and the geisha, and have entered the world of the common people, the farmers and the artisans. Their lives were dictated not by codes of honour or artistic pursuits, but by the relentless rhythm of the seasons and the hard work of the harvest. Their approach to intimacy was, in many ways, more practical and superstitious than the elites, a blend of folk wisdom and raw physical reality. A mainstream historical fact of this time is that for most of the population, marriage wasn't about love or status. It was a matter of survival and procreation. A family needed sons to work the fields, to carry on the family name, and to care for the elders. Marriages were often arranged by the family patriarch, or by a village elder, with a focus on finding a healthy, strong partner who could work hard and produce healthy children. It was a practical alliance, a merger of labour and bloodlines, and any romance was an unexpected bonus. But within this pragmatic world, there were 1,000 superstitions and folk beliefs about fertility and intimacy. A quirky tidbit from the peasantry is the use of bizarre and sometimes comical rituals to ensure a good harvest of children. For example, some villages would hold a fertility festival where a large wooden phallus was carried through the streets, accompanied by loud music and dancing. Women would touch it, hoping to be blessed with a healthy child. It was a boisterous, public celebration of life and procreation, a far cry from the secretive rituals of the shogun's uku. This was a direct, unapologetic engagement with the body and its creative power. You see a group of farmers now, laughing and joking as they mend a fence. They're talking about a young couple in the village who have been trying to conceive for a while. One of the men suggests a folk remedy, a special tea made from a certain herb gathered under a full moon. Another man, with a twinkle in his eye, suggests something else, something whispered and lewd that makes the others erupt in laughter. It's a very different atmosphere from the rigid formalities of the samurai or the artistic subtleties of the courtesans. Here, intimacy is not a matter of honour or art. It's a matter of life and death, of the family's survival, and it's discussed with a surprising amount of humour and candour. Historians still argue whether the common folk of feudal Japan had more sexual freedom than the upper classes. On one hand, they weren't bound by the strict codes of Bushido or the formalities of the shogun's court. They were free to form relationships, to have children, and to live their lives without constant scrutiny. On the other hand, their lives were dictated by poverty and hardship, and their intimacy was often a matter of quick, functional encounters rather than romantic interludes. Some scholars believe that the peasantry enjoyed a more natural and uninhibited relationship with their bodies and with each other, while others suggest that their lives were so brutal that intimacy was just another kind of labour. It's a debate that highlights the difficulty of understanding the inner lives of people who left behind few written records. The peasants also had a number of beliefs about the body and its relationship to the natural world. A woman's menstrual cycle, for example, was often seen as a period of impurity, and she would be secluded in a small hut or a separate part of the house during her cycle. This wasn't necessarily a punishment, but a custom born of a deep-seated belief in ritual purity. It's a reminder of how intertwined daily life was with spiritual beliefs. The body was not just a biological machine, it was a vessel of spiritual power, and its rhythms were a part of the larger rhythm of the cosmos. The concept of a honeymoon was completely alien to the peasantry. A couple would marry, and a few days later, the woman would be expected to be out in the fields, working alongside her new husband. There was no time for a romantic getaway. Intimacy was something that happened in the dark, in the quiet of a shared room, after a long day of back-breaking labour. It was a moment of connection and comfort in a world that offered very little of either. Despite the hardships, there was also a strong sense of community and shared experience. When a woman was pregnant, the entire village would offer her support and advice, and when a child was born, it was a cause for celebration for everyone. The community was an extended family, and the health and prosperity of one family was the concern of all. This is a beautiful contrast to the isolated, paranoid world of the shogun's palace. The peasantry's approach to intimacy was a pragmatic, superstitious, and surprisingly candid one. They celebrated the body's power to create life, they laughed about its foibles, and they relied on folk wisdom and ancient rituals to help them navigate the mysteries of conception and birth. They may not have had the refined art of the pillow books or the strict codes of the samurai, but they had something just as powerful, a raw, unvarnished connection to the earth and to each other. As the sun sets and you see the warm glow of a fire in a nearby farmhouse, you realise that the most profound stories of human life often take place in the most humble settings. The world of feudal Japan was a tapestry of 1,000 different lives, and the stories of the common people, though often overlooked, are some of the most human and enduring. Leaving the rustic fields and the candid conversations of the peasantry behind, you find yourself back in a bustling town square. The air is filled with the sound of merchants hawking their wares and the chatter of 1,000 conversations. You're watching a very public, very formal, and very awkward ceremony, a pre-wedding ritual. In feudal Japan, especially among the merchant and samurai classes, marriage was a serious business, a contract between two families, and the process of finding a suitable spouse was a meticulous and often brutal affair. A mainstream historical fact is that arranged marriages, or omiai, were the standard practice. Love matches were rare and often frowned upon, seen as an irresponsible and selfish way to choose a partner. The family's honour and financial stability were at stake, and the choice of a spouse was too important to be left to the whims of the heart. The process began with a matchmaker, the nakodo, who would act as a go-between, negotiating everything from the dowry to the number of attendants the bride would bring with her. The nakodo's job was not just to find a match, but to ensure that the families were of a similar social standing and that the union would be beneficial to all parties. You see a young woman now, perhaps 17 or 18, sitting in a room with her family. A nakodo, a stern-faced woman in a pristine kimono, is describing the prospective groom. He's from a good family, a successful merchant with a promising future. He's healthy, well-mannered, and has a good reputation. The young woman listens silently, her eyes downcast. She has no say in the matter. Her opinion is not asked for, nor is it considered relevant. She's a commodity, a valuable asset to be traded for the security and prosperity of her family. It's a harsh reality, a brutal kind of pragmatism that makes your modern sensibilities cringe. A quirky tidbit from this time is the ritual of yuno, the formal exchange of gifts between the two families. This wasn't just a simple gift exchange, it was a complex and highly symbolic ceremony. The gifts would often include things like a fan, which symbolised a prosperous future that would open like the fan, and a container of fish, which symbolised fertility. These were not romantic gestures, they were practical, almost contractual symbols of what was expected from the marriage: prosperity, growth, and children. The entire process was a public performance, a way for the families to announce their new alliance to the world. Historians still argue whether the arranged marriage system was a form of oppression or a source of stability. Some scholars believe that by taking the emotion out of marriage, it created a more stable society, with family alliances and social hierarchies firmly in place. They point to the fact that divorces were far less common than in other cultures. Others argue that the system was deeply dehumanizing, that it crushed the spirits of countless young people and led to a lifetime of quiet desperation. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle. For some, it was a source of security and a path to a comfortable life. For others, it was a gilded cage, a prison of duty and expectation. Once the marriage was arranged, there were a series of bizarre pre-wedding rituals. One of the most famous was the sack ceremony, where the bride and groom would exchange 3 cups of sake, each with 3 sips, in a highly ritualized performance. The number 3 was seen as a lucky number, and the act of sharing the sack symbolized the sharing of their lives. It was one of the few moments in the entire process where the couple would actually interact, and even then, it was under the watchful eyes of their families, with every gesture, every sip scrutinized for its symbolic meaning. But the real brutality of the system was often felt after the wedding. A young woman would leave her family forever, moving into her husband's household and becoming a part of his family. She was expected to serve her new in-laws, especially her mother-in-law, with unwavering obedience and respect. The mother-in-law was often the true matriarch of the household, and she could be a cruel and demanding taskmaster. The young bride's life was a constant struggle to please her new family, to prove her worth, and to produce a male heir. It was a kind of trial by fire, a test of her endurance and her loyalty. The pressure to produce an heir was immense, and a woman who failed to do so was often seen as a failure, a blight on her new family's honour. This is where the concept of concubines, which we've touched on before, comes back into play. If the primary wife could not produce an heir, the husband was expected to take a concubine. This was not a matter of infidelity, but a pragmatic solution to a family problem. The concubine's child would be raised as the heir, and the wife would be expected to accept the arrangement with grace and dignity. It's a brutal system, a testament to the idea that a woman's value was almost entirely tied to her fertility. You watch as the ceremony ends and the 2 families bow to each other. The young couple for the first time stand side by side, their faces unreadable. You can't help but wonder what they're thinking. Are they happy? Are they terrified? Are they simply resigned to their fate? You'll never know. Their story, and the thousands of others like it, is a private one. A drama that plays out behind closed doors, a world where love is a luxury and duty is a demanding master. As the sun sets on the town square, casting long shadows across the faces of the 2 families, you're left with the quiet knowledge that sometimes the most horrific practices are not the most violent ones, but the ones that slowly, quietly crush the human spirit. The wedding party has dispersed, and you follow the newly married couple to their new home. The air is tense with unspoken expectations. You've just witnessed the formal beginning of a union, but the real story, the messy, complicated drama of concubinage and family honour, is just beginning. In feudal Japan, particularly among the samurai and wealthy merchant classes, the primary wife was the official face of the family, but the concubines were often the engines of its future. Their presence was not a secret, but a political and social necessity, a fact of life that could make or break a family's fortunes. A mainstream historical fact of this era is that a samurai's primary wife, the seisai, was chosen for her lineage and her ability to manage a household. She was the mistress of the estate, responsible for all the servants and for maintaining the family's reputation. But her most crucial duty was to produce a male heir. If she failed, the husband was not just allowed to take a concubine, he was often expected to do so. This was not an act of infidelity, but an act of duty. The concubine's role, the makake, was to provide the heir that the wife could not. The concubine's child would then be adopted by the wife and raised as her own, a bizarre and often heartbreaking arrangement that both secured the family line and created a profoundly complex family dynamic. You're watching a new wife, a young woman who has just moved into her husband's grand estate. She is beautiful, intelligent, and from a good family. But after a few years, she has not produced a male heir. Her husband, a kind but pragmatic man, begins to spend more time in a different part of the house, with a different woman, a concubine chosen for her fertility and her gentle nature. The wife is expected to maintain her composure, to show no jealousy, to accept this with a quiet, dignified grace. Her value is no longer in her ability to procreate, but in her ability to manage her household and her own emotions. It's a cruel and subtle kind of psychological torment, a test of her character that she has no choice but to endure. A quirky tidbit is the strict social hierarchy that existed even among the concubines. A high-ranking concubine might be a former courtesan, or a woman from a lesser noble family. A low-ranking concubine might be a servant from the household, elevated to her new position for a night or for a season. Each had a different level of status and power, and each was vying for the affection of the master and the security that came with producing a male child. The competition was fierce. and the atmosphere in the private quarters of a wealthy samurai's home was a constant, low-level war of subtle gestures and whispered resentments. Historians still argue whether the concubine system was a form of liberation or a greater form of exploitation. Some scholars believe that for women from the lower classes, becoming a concubine was a way to escape a life of poverty and hardship. A concubine's son could become a high-ranking samurai, and she, in turn, would be cared for and respected. In this sense, it was a unique kind of social mobility. Others argue that the system was a brutal expression of patriarchal power, that it commodified women and turned them into nothing more than vessels for male heirs. The women were used, their bodies and their emotions exploited for the sake of family honour, and their lives were often a constant quiet tragedy. The primary wife, meanwhile, was not a powerless victim. Her power lay in her position as the head of the household. She managed the finances, she oversaw the servants, and she was the official face of the family in public. She could, and often did, wield a great deal of influence. Her ability to gracefully accept her husband's concubines and to raise their child as her own was seen as a sign of her strength and her honour. It's a bit like a modern CEO managing a hostile takeover. She had to bring the new asset into the fold and make it work for the good of the company, or in this case, the family. The children born to concubines were in a strange and precarious position. They were the heir to the family, but they were also a constant living reminder of the wife's failure. The children were expected to honour and respect the wife as their mother, and the concubine as a secondary figure. The concubine, in a heartbreaking twist of fate, was often separated from her own child, forced to watch from a distance as another woman raised him. It was a system designed to secure the family line, but one that came at an immense emotional cost for everyone involved. You're seeing a wife now, a little older, a little wiser, sitting with her son. He is a handsome boy, the future of the family. He's the child of her husband and a concubine, but she has raised him with all the love and care a mother could give. She smiles at him, a genuine smile, but you can see the shadow in her eyes, the echo of a life she never got to live. She's a woman who has sacrificed everything for her family's honour, a silent hero in a world that demanded a quiet, dignified suffering. The practice of concubinage and its role in family honour is a stark reminder of the priorities of feudal Japan. The individual was nothing, the family was everything. A person's desires, emotions and dreams were all subordinate to the needs of the clan. It's a world that is at once deeply alien and surprisingly familiar, a world that makes you question what we value in our own time. As the sun sets on the grand estate, you're left with the quiet understanding that the most profound dramas of human history often take place not on the battlefield, but within the walls of a single powerful family, in the quiet, desperate struggle for honour and survival. The echoes of their secrets linger in the fading light. The grand estate of the samurai fades into the distance, and you find yourself in the bustling commercial heart of a town. The air is filled with the shouts of street vendors, the clatter of carts on cobbled streets, and the rhythmic hammer of a blacksmith. You're in a world where money and influence are on the rise, and the old samurai codes are being challenged by the new realities of commerce. In this world, the very concept of a family name, and the power that came with it, was a flexible and often manipulated commodity. This is the world of yomeri and mukoyoshi, a bizarre and fascinating practice that allowed a family to ensure its legacy, even in the absence of a biological son. A mainstream historical fact is that for a family, particularly a merchant or artisan family, having a male heir was a matter of immense importance. Without a son to inherit the business and carry on the family name, the family's legacy and its assets could be lost forever. But what if you only had daughters? The solution was not to pass the business to the daughter's husband, which would change the family name. The solution was to adopt a son-in-law, a mukoyoshi, into the family. This was a man who, upon marriage, would take on his wife's family name and become the heir to her family's business and assets. He would, in essence, become the family's son. You see a young man now, a talented apprentice to a master potter. He's in love with the master's daughter, a beautiful and clever girl who has been helping her father with the business. They want to get married, but the potter has no sons. The potter approaches the young man, not with an offer of his daughter's hand, but with an offer to be his heir. The young man, in a move that is both practical and deeply emotional, agrees. He will give up his own family name, his own legacy, to become the son of his wife's family. It's a beautiful and complex sacrifice, a a testament to a kind of love and loyalty that transcends the usual boundaries of family and identity. A quirky tidbit from this practice is the fact that a mukoyoshi was often treated with a great deal of respect, and sometimes with more deference than a biological son. He was, in a sense, a prized possession, a hand-picked heir who had proven his loyalty and his worth. His new family would go to great lengths to ensure his happiness and his success, because their future depended on it. It's a fascinating inversion of the patriarchal norms of the time. The family wasn't just looking for a son, they were looking for a talented and dedicated leader for their business, and they were willing to break the rules of tradition to find him. Historians still argue whether the mukoyoshi system was a form of exploitation or a source of opportunity. Some scholars believe that for a young, talented man from a poor family, becoming a mukoyoshi was a ticket to wealth and power, a way to climb the social ladder that would have been impossible otherwise. They see it as a kind of meritocracy, a system that valued talent and hard work over bloodlines. Others argue that it was a deeply dehumanizing practice, that it turned a man into a kind of human asset, a tool for a family's survival. The man was expected to give up his own identity, his own history, for the sake of his new family, a kind of psychological death that could be a heavy burden to bear. The role of the daughter in this equation, a practice called yomeri, was also complex. She was not just a bride, she was a keeper of the family legacy, a woman who had the responsibility of choosing a partner who would be worthy of carrying on her family's name. She was often a skilled business manager in her own right, and she had to be a shrewd judge of character, able to spot a man who was not just a good husband, but a good leader for her family's future. This gave her a level of power and influence that was rare for women of the time, a subtle but significant subversion of the patriarchal order. The children of a mukoyoshi and his wife were in a unique position. They were the biological heirs of their father, but they carried their mother's family name. They were a living testament to the blending of two families, and they were raised with a deep sense of responsibility to the legacy of their maternal grandparents. It's a system that, in a beautiful way, honoured the contribution of the female line, a testament to the idea that a woman's family was just as important as a man's. The yomeri and mukoyoshi systems were not just about business, they were also about love and loyalty. A man who became a mukoyoshi was expected to love his new wife and his new family, but he was also expected to be fiercely loyal to them. His loyalty was not to his own bloodline, but to the family that had adopted him. It was a kind of emotional contract, a vow of fealty that was just as strong and often stronger than the samurai's vow to his lord. You watch as the young potter and his new wife, now a family, stand side by side, their faces filled with a quiet determination. They have a business to run, a legacy to protect, and a family name to carry on. They have given up something of themselves to be together, but they have also gained something profound, a new identity, a new purpose, and a new future. As the sun sets on the bustling town, you realise that the most powerful forces in feudal Japan were not always the samurai and the shogun, but the quiet, unyielding forces of love, family, and the human desire to build something that will last. The world of yomeri and mukoyoshi is a world where tradition and innovation, love and duty, were not enemies, but partners in the complex dance of life. The bustling town square gives way to a quiet, secluded dojo. The air is still, save for the soft rustle of leaves and the faint clang of steel. You're back in the world of the samurai, but this time, you're not here for the grand pronouncements of Bushido. You're here for the quiet whispers, the secret histories, the intricate and profound relationships that defined a samurai's inner life. We're going to delve deeper into the fascinating world of Shudo, the path of male love, a tradition we touched on briefly before but which deserves a much closer look. A mainstream historical fact of this era is that same-sex relationships were not only accepted, but were considered a vital part of samurai culture. Shudo, which translates roughly to the way of the youth, was a mentorship and an affectionate bond between an older, experienced samurai, the ninja, and a younger, often adolescent samurai, the wakashu. This wasn't a hidden practice. It was an open and celebrated part of a young man's education. The relationship was seen as a way to forge a stronger, more disciplined warrior, and the loyalty between the two was often considered more pure and unbreakable than the loyalty to a woman. You see a young wakashu now, perhaps 15 years old, practicing his sword forms. His movements are a little clumsy, a little uncertain. His ninja, a seasoned veteran with a stern face and a calm demeanour, watches him with a hawk's eye. The ninja corrects the wakashu's stance, a gentle hand on his shoulder, a soft word of advice. The relationship is clearly one of respect and mentorship, but you can feel something else in the air, a quiet, almost paternal affection that runs much deeper than just a master and student relationship. The two of them share a bond that is both physical and emotional, a bond that is celebrated in samurai poetry and art of the time. A quirky tidbit about this tradition is that the younger samurai, the wakashu, was considered the more valuable partner in the relationship. He was the one who was being initiated into the world of honour and loyalty, and he was the one who was expected to show a fierce and unwavering devotion to his ninja. The wakashu's loyalty was a matter of immense pride for both of them, and a betrayal of that loyalty was seen as one of the most heinous crimes a samurai could commit. This is a fascinating inversion of power dynamics, where the younger, less experienced partner holds a kind of emotional power over the older one. It's a very different kind of intimacy than the one-sided transactional relationships of the shogun's uku. Historians still argue whether shudo was a form of platonic mentorship that sometimes had a sexual component, or if the sexual intimacy was a central and defining part of the relationship. Some scholars believe that the sexual aspect was seen as a way to seal the bond between the two, a physical manifestation of their spiritual and emotional connection. Others suggest that the sexual aspect was often a less important part of the relationship, a kind of rite of passage that was a precursor to a more profound bond of loyalty and affection. The truth, as is often the case, probably varied from couple to couple. For some, it was a deep and enduring love. For others, it was a temporary apprenticeship. The relationship between the ninja and the wakashu was not a secret. The two of them would often live together, and their relationship would be openly acknowledged by their peers. It was seen as a sign of a strong, disciplined, and honourable samurai. The relationship would often end when the wakashu came of age, when he was old enough to take a wife and begin a family of his own. The bond would then transform into a deep and lasting friendship, a powerful alliance that would last a lifetime. This is a crucial difference from many other cultures, where same-sex relationships were seen as something to be hidden and shamed. In feudal Japan, they were a part of the official culture, a part of what it meant to be a man of honour. The literature and art of the period are full of references to shudo. The bukagiri, samurai honour, and bukagiri no tame, for the sake of samurai honour, were often invoked in these relationships, and stories of two samurai dying together for the sake of their love and loyalty were a popular genre. It's a reminder that love and honour were not seen as separate things, but as two sides of the same coin. The ability to love and be loyal to another man was seen as a sign of a man's capacity for love and loyalty to his lord. The samurai's wife, meanwhile, was not seen as a competitor to this relationship. Her role was to produce heirs, to manage the household, and to be a silent, dutiful partner. The husband's emotional and spiritual needs were often met by his male companions, and the wife was a manager of the family line, not a romantic partner. It's a bit like a CEO with a close business partner and a wife who manages his household affairs, two very different relationships for two very different needs. As the sun sets on the dojo, you see the ninja and the wakashu standing together, their faces illuminated by the fading light. They are not just master and student, they are partners, allies, and friends. Their bond is a testament to the idea that love and loyalty can be found in the most unexpected of places, and that a culture's official rules and its hidden realities are often two very different things. The world of shudo is a world of quiet dignity, of fierce loyalty, and of a kind of love that transcended the strictures of gender and procreation. It's a world that challenges our modern assumptions about love, honour, and masculinity, and it's a world that is, in its own way, profoundly beautiful. Leaving the quiet intensity of the dojo, you find yourself back in the vibrant, noisy streets of a major city. But this time, you're not in the pleasure quarter. You're in a more refined, more artistic part of town. The air is filled with the delicate sounds of a shamisen and the gentle rustle of a silk fan. You're witnessing the rise of a new kind of star, a woman who was not a concubine, not a wife, but a professional artist and entertainer. This is the story of the geisha, a woman who, in a world of strict social rules, carved out a unique and powerful space for herself. A mainstream historical fact of the Edo period is that the geisha, which literally means person of art, began as male entertainers. These men would perform songs and dances at parties and banquets, and they were the precursors to the female geisha we know today. But as the pleasure quarters grew more elaborate, the demand for female entertainers grew. The first female geisha appeared in the late 18th century, and their popularity exploded. They were not prostitutes, as is often misunderstood in the West. Their role was to be a skilled artist, a witty conversationalist, and a master of 1,000 different arts, from singing and dancing to poetry and the tea ceremony. You see a young geisha now, walking to her engagement. She's not wearing the elaborate heavy kimono of an oiran. Her kimono is elegant and understated, her makeup is simple and refined, and her hair is styled with a subtle grace. She's a woman of immense discipline and intelligence, and she has spent years mastering her craft. She is a symbol of a different kind of beauty, a beauty that comes from inner strength and artistic skill, not from mere physical perfection. Her value is not in her body, but in her mind and her talent. A quirky tidbit from this time is that the geisha had their own strict social codes and their own unique language. They lived in special geisha districts, called hanamachi, or flower towns, and they were governed by a matriarchal system run by a woman known as the okasan, or mother. The okasan ran the geisha house, managed the finances, and trained the younger geisha. This was a world run by women, for women, and it offered a kind of professional autonomy that was almost unheard of in feudal Japan. It's a fascinating inversion of the male-dominated world of the samurai and the merchant classes. Historians still argue whether the geisha were truly liberated, or if they were simply a more sophisticated form of exploitation. Some scholars believe that the geisha's life was a path to a kind of freedom, a way for a woman to gain financial independence and social standing without being tied to a man or a family. They point to the stories of geisha who became incredibly wealthy and powerful, and who were the companions of shoguns and emperors. Others argue that the geisha were still, at their core, servants of men, and that their freedom was an illusion. They were bound by contracts, their bodies were often exploited, and their lives were a constant performance. The debate highlights the complex and often contradictory nature of women's lives in feudal Japan. The geisha's relationships with their clients were complex and often deeply emotional. They were not just entertainers, they were confidants, therapists, and companions. Men would go to the geisha houses not just for a performance, but for conversation, for a moment of peace, and for a kind of intimacy that they couldn't find in their own homes. The geisha were masters of the art of listening, of making a man feel seen and heard. Their job was to create a space of beauty and quiet, a sanctuary from the harsh realities of the world. The geisha's profession was not a temporary one. A geisha would often spend her entire life in the hanamachi, and she would continue to practice her art well into her old age. The older geisha, the kobai, were often the most respected and the most sought after, their skill and their wisdom a testament to a lifetime of dedication. They were not just performers, they were living links to a rich and ancient tradition, and they were the keepers of 1,000 different secrets. The geisha's relationships were not just with their male clients. They often formed deep and lasting friendships with each other, a sisterhood of shared experience and mutual support. The okasan was not just a manager, she was a mother, a mentor, and a confidant. The geisha house was not just a workplace, it was a home, a sanctuary where women could be themselves, where they could be strong and vulnerable, and where they could support each other in a world that was often hostile to them. You see a young geisha now sitting with a client, a wealthy merchant. She's not just performing for him, she's talking with him, listening to him, her face a mask of quiet empathy. She's a beautiful woman, a talented artist, and a shrewd businesswoman all in one. She's a symbol of a new kind of power, a power that comes not from a sword or from a family name, but from her own talent, her own intelligence, and her own ability to navigate a complex and often dangerous world. As the sound of the shamisen fades into the night, you are left with the quiet understanding that the rise of the geisha was not just a cultural phenomenon, it was a revolution, a quiet but powerful shift in the way women could live and work in feudal Japan, a testament to the enduring power of art to create a space of beauty and freedom in a world that was often dark and constrained. Leaving the elegant world of the hanamachi, you find yourself on a dirt road, the wind whispering through a forest of bamboo. The gentle rustle of silk is replaced by the clank of steel, and the delicate notes of a shamisen are replaced by the sharp, metallic tang of a sword being drawn. You're in a different kind of world now, a world where women were not just objects of affection or managers of households, but warriors. This is the world of the Onabugisha, the female samurai, a rare but powerful class of women who wielded both a sword and a surprising amount of sexual autonomy. A mainstream historical fact is that while the samurai class was overwhelmingly male, there were a number of women who were trained in the martial arts and who fought alongside their male counterparts. The Onobugisha were not a separate class of warriors, but a part of the larger samurai class. They were the wives, daughters and sisters of samurai who had been trained to defend their homes and their families in times of war. They were masters of the naginata, a long curved blade, and they were often the last line of defence when a samurai stronghold was under siege. You see an Onobugeisha now, a young woman, perhaps in her early 20s, practising with her naginata. Her movements are graceful and fluid, a deadly dance of steel and silk. She's not a muscle-bound warrior. She is slight, but her movements are precise. Her focus is absolute. She is a symbol of a different kind of power, a power that comes not from brute strength, but from skill, discipline, and an unwavering will. Her beauty is not fragile. It is sharp, dangerous, and utterly captivating. A quirky tidbit from this time is that the Onobugeisha were not just warriors. They were also often the heads of their households. When a samurai died in battle, his wife would often take over his duties, managing his estate, raising his children, and leading his retainers. This gave them a surprising amount of political and economic power, a power that was often completely overlooked by the men of their time. They were not just the defenders of the home, they were the guardians of the family legacy, a quiet but powerful force that kept the samurai class from crumbling in the face of constant warfare. Historians still argue whether the Onobugeisha had more sexual autonomy than other women of their time. On one hand, their martial prowess and their leadership roles gave them a level of respect and power that was rare for women. They were not seen as delicate flowers to be protected, but as equals in battle and in the home. This may have given them the freedom to choose their own partners, or to refuse a man who was not worthy of them. On the other hand, they were still bound by the same patriarchal rules as all women. They were expected to produce a male heir, to be a dutiful wife, and to be a symbol of their family's honour. Their lives were a constant, difficult balance between the freedom of the sword and the strictures of the family. The stories of the Onobugeisha are full of a kind of quiet defiance. They were women who refused to be defined by the expectations of their time. They were warriors who fought for their families, but they were also mothers who raised their children and wives who loved their husbands. They were a contradiction, a paradox, and a testament to the enduring strength and resilience of the human spirit. Their lives were a testament to the idea that a woman could be both beautiful and deadly, both a warrior and a mother, both a leader and a wife. The sexual practices of the Onobugeisha were not all that different from those of the men of their time. They were expected to produce a male heir, and if they failed, their husband was expected to take a concubine. But their relationships were often more a partnership than a patriarchal arrangement. A samurai who married an Onobugeisha was not just marrying a wife, he was marrying an equal, a partner in war and in life. Their relationship was one of a mutual respect and admiration, a rare kind of intimacy that was born out of a shared struggle and a shared commitment to a life of honour. The Onobugeisha's story is a powerful reminder that history is not just about the men who fought the battles, but about the women who stood beside them, and sometimes in front of them. It is a story of a woman who refused to be a victim, who took up a sword and a naginata, and who fought for her family's honour, her children's future, and her own dignity. As the sun sets and the moon rises over the bamboo forest, you can almost hear the soft, rhythmic hum of a naginata being swung through the air, a silent but powerful reminder of the strength and resilience of the women who refused to be silenced. Leaving the quiet, deadly grace of the Onobugeisha behind, you find yourself in a different kind of darkness. This isn't the quiet solitude of a dojo, but the cold, hard walls of a samurai magistrate's office. The air is thick with the scent of old paper, cold tea, and a palpable sense of fear. You're about to witness the brutal, often creative, and completely unforgiving punishments for infidelity. In a society built on honour and lineage, a betrayal of the marital bed was not just a personal matter. It was a crime against the family, the clan, and the very fabric of society. A mainstream historical fact is that infidelity was a capital crime in feudal Japan, but the punishment was not the same for men and women. A man who had a mistress or a concubine was often not punished at all, as long as he was discreet and his actions did not bring shame to his family. A woman, on the other hand, who was caught in an adulterous relationship, a furin, was often sentenced to death. This breathtaking double standard was a direct result of the patriarchal society, where a man's infidelity was a matter of personal desire, but a woman's was a threat to the legitimacy of the family's bloodline. A husband who discovered his wife's infidelity had the legal right to kill her and her lover on the spot. You're watching a magistrate now, a stern-faced man in a heavy black robe. He's listening to a case of a young woman, a merchant's wife, who was caught with a samurai. The husband, a respectable but unremarkable man, is standing before him, his face a mask of shame and fury. The punishment is not just for the woman, it is for him too. He has failed in his duty to protect his family's honour, and he is a laughingstock. The magistrate listens, his face impassive, and you know what the verdict will be. The woman will be put to death, and her family will be forever shamed. It's a brutal and swift kind of justice, a testament to the idea that some sins were unforgivable. A quirky tidbit is the use of public shaming as a form of punishment. A woman who was caught in an adulterous relationship might be paraded through the streets, her head shaved and her face covered in white powder, a sign of her disgrace. She would be forced to wear a sign around her neck that detailed her crime, and she would be followed by a crowd of jeering onlookers. This was not just a punishment for her. It was a warning to all women, a public spectacle designed to remind them of their place in society and the terrible consequences of straying from it. It's a cruel and unusual punishment, a form of public theatre that was designed to terrorise and control. Historians still argue whether the severity of the punishment for female infidelity was a sign of a society's deep-seated fear of female sexuality, or a pragmatic way to ensure the legitimacy of the bloodline. Some scholars believe that the public execution of adulterous women was a kind of moral panic, a way for men to reassert their control over a world that was becoming increasingly complex and unpredictable. Others argue that the punishment was simply a logical extension of the family-first mentality, that a woman who threatened the family's honour and its legacy was a threat to the very survival of the clan, and she had to be eliminated. The punishments for infidelity were not just physical, they were also psychological. A husband who discovered his wife's infidelity might not kill her. He might divorce her, and she would be forced to return to her family in shame. Her family in turn would often disown her, and she would be a pariah, a woman without a home, a name, or a future. Her life would be a kind of living death, a constant quiet punishment that was in some ways even more brutal than a quick execution. The double standard for men was breathtaking in its audacity. A samurai could have a dozen concubines, and it would not be considered a crime. In fact, it would often be a source of pride, a testament to his wealth and his virility. But if his wife so much as looked at another man, she was a traitor, a criminal, a woman who deserved to die. It's a kind of moral calculus that is completely alien to our modern sensibilities, a world where a woman's sexuality was a commodity to be controlled, and her emotions were a danger to be suppressed. You see a woman now, a widow, sitting alone in a small room. She's a woman who, after her husband's death, was accused of an affair. Her husband's family, in a move to seize her inheritance, brought a false charge against her. She was a woman who had nowhere to go, no one to turn to. She was a ghost in a world that had no place for her. Her story is not a story of a crime and a punishment. It is a story of a system, a cruel and unyielding system that was designed to protect the powerful and to crush the powerless. The magistrate's office is silent now. The verdict has been delivered, and the young woman has been led away. You're left with the cold, hard knowledge that justice in feudal Japan was not a matter of fairness or equality. It was a matter of honour, of lineage, and of a power that was always, always in the hands of men. As the sun sets on the magistrate's office, you can almost hear the whispered stories of 1,000 betrayed women, 1,000 quiet tragedies, 1,000 punishments that were as cruel as they were creative. Their stories linger in the air, a silent but powerful testament to a world that was at once beautiful and brutal, a world where the most horrific practices were often those that were enshrined in the law. The cold, brutal justice of the magistrate's office gives way to the low light of a scholar's study. The scent of fear is replaced by the smell of herbs, tinctures, and 1,000 years of accumulated folk wisdom. You're entering a world of superstition and science, a world where the body was a source of both mystery and immense anxiety. This is a journey into the bizarre and often horrific medical beliefs of feudal Japan, especially those related to fertility, conception, and the intimacy of the body. A mainstream historical fact of this time is that Japanese medicine was a blend of traditional Chinese medicine, folk remedies, and a kind of proto-science. Doctors, or kusushi, were often highly respected, but their knowledge was limited, and their tools were primitive. For the common folk, a lot of medicine was a matter of superstition and ritual. A good harvest of children was just as important as a good harvest of rice, and a woman who couldn't conceive was not just a medical problem, she was a spiritual one, a woman who was out of harmony with the cosmos. You're watching a doctor now, a wizened old man with a long white beard, examining a young woman. She has been married for 5 years and has not produced a child. The husband, a wealthy merchant, is standing in the corner, his face a mixture of concern and impatience. The doctor is not just looking for a physical ailment, he is examining her pulse, looking at the colour of her tongue, and asking her about her dreams and her emotions. He is a holistic practitioner, a man who believes that the body, the mind, and the spirit are all interconnected. His diagnosis is not a medical one in our modern sense, it is a spiritual one. He says that the woman's key, her life energy, is out of balance, and he prescribes a series of herbs, prayers, and rituals to restore it. A quirky tidbit from this time is the use of bizarre and sometimes comical remedies for fertility. For example, some women would carry a small bag of rice from a temple, believing that it would bless them with a child. Others would pray to a specific Shinto deity, often a phallic one, believing that the deity would bless them with a healthy child. The line between medicine and magic was often blurred, and a woman who was desperate for a child would try anything, no matter how strange or how embarrassing it was. It's a testament to the immense pressure that was placed on women to procreate. Historians still argue whether these folk remedies were a form of empowerment or a form of control. Some scholars believe that the rituals and remedies gave women a sense of agency, a way to feel like they were actively participating in the process of creation. They could pray, they could perform rituals, they could feel like they were doing something to solve their problem. Others argue that the rituals were a way to shift the blame from the husband to the wife, to make her feel like it was her fault that she couldn't conceive. The pressure to procreate was immense, and the rituals were a way to internalize that pressure, a way to make it her responsibility to fix her problem. The doctors of the time also had some very strange beliefs about the body. For example, they believed that a woman's uterus, the shikyu, was a mobile organ that could wander around the body. A woman who was suffering from a stomachache or a headache might be diagnosed with a wandering uterus, and the doctor would prescribe a series of herbs and massage techniques to force it back into place. It's a hilarious and horrifying thought, isn't it? A doctor trying to herd a woman's uterus back into her abdomen, a kind of medical game of whack-a-mole. The concept of contraception was not widely practiced, but it was not unknown. There were folk remedies and herbs that were said to prevent conception, but they were often dangerous and ineffective. The primary form of contraception was infanticide, the killing of unwanted children. This was a brutal reality of a society that was often plagued by famine and poverty, a society where a family simply couldn't afford to feed another mouth. This is a difficult and tragic part of feudal Japanese history, a reminder that the beauty and the elegance of the elite classes often came at the cost of immense suffering for the poor. The medical beliefs of the time were a reflection of the society as a whole. The body was a source of mystery and fear, a place where 1,000 different spirits and humours were at play. A sickness was not just a physical ailment, it was a spiritual one, a sign that a person was out of harmony with the cosmos. A woman who couldn't conceive was not just a medical problem, she was a spiritual one. A woman who had failed in her most important duty. You see a woman now, a young wife, walking to a shrine. She's carrying a small worn piece of wood, a feuda, with a prayer for a child written on it. She's a woman who has tried everything, the herbs, the rituals, the doctor's strange advice, and she is now turning to the gods. She's a symbol of hope and despair, a woman caught between a world of science and a world of superstition. A woman who is desperate for a child and a world that will not give her one. As she kneels before the shrine, you're left with the quiet understanding that the human body, in all its mystery and its power, was a source of both immense joy and immense suffering. A world that was at once beautiful and brutal. A world where the most profound secrets of life were often left to the whims of 1,000 different gods and ghosts. Leaving the superstitious world of folk remedies and shrines, you find yourself on a much more rarefied path, one paved with polished stone and surrounded by meticulously raked gardens. The air is still, almost unnaturally so, and the only sound is the soft rhythmic patter of water in a secluded fountain. You have arrived at the Imperial Palace, the home of the Emperor, the divine ruler of Japan. This is a world that, for all its divinity, was still a hotbed of political intrigue, power plays, and some of the most peculiar rules about intimacy you can imagine. A mainstream historical fact of this era is that the Emperor, while a divine figurehead, had very little real political power. The real power was held by the shogun. But the Emperor's lineage was paramount. His family line was believed to have descended from the sun goddess Amaterasu, and the continuation of that line was not just a matter of succession, it was a matter of national and cosmic importance. This meant that the Emperor's consorts and their children were a matter of immense political significance, and their lives were governed by 1,000 different rules and rituals. You're standing in the Gosho, the inner court of the palace, a world of women and eunuchs, a world that was even more secretive and secluded than the shogun's uku. The women here were not just concubines, they were a part of the sacred lineage, and their children were the future of Japan. The women were chosen not just for their beauty, but for their lineage, their education, and their ability to produce a healthy male heir. They were a carefully curated collection of the most well-bred women in Japan, and their every move was watched, recorded, and scrutinized. A quirky tidbit from this time is the ritual of Nyogo, where a woman would be elevated to the rank of a consort. This wasn't just a simple promotion, it was a ritual that involved a series of prayers, ceremonies, and public pronouncements. The woman would be given a new name, a new rank, and a new identity. She would become a part of the divine family, and her life would be dedicated to the service of the Emperor and the continuation of his sacred lineage. It's a kind of spiritual and political marriage, a testament to the idea that a woman's body and her fertility were not just her own. They were a matter of national importance. Historians still argue whether the Emperor had any real emotional connection with his consorts. Some scholars believe that the Emperor, a man who was secluded from the outside world, and who was treated like a living god, was a lonely figure, and that he may have formed genuine bonds of affection with some of his consorts. Others argue that the Emperor's life was so circumscribed by ritual and political necessity that he was incapable of forming a normal human relationship. The consorts were, in essence, a kind of living doll, a beautiful and compliant part of his divine life, but not a true partner. The power plays within the imperial court were as subtle as they were deadly. The different consorts, and their families, were constantly vying for the Emperor's attention and affection. The mother of the Emperor's first son would become the most powerful woman in the court, and her family would gain immense political influence. This meant that the consorts were not just competing for the Emperor's love, they were competing for the future of their families and the future of Japan. It was a war of subtle gestures, of whispered rumours, and of carefully orchestrated alliances. The Emperor's daily life was a highly ritualised affair. His intimacy with his consorts was not a private matter. It was a public and political one. The time, the place, and the duration of his intimacy were all decided by the court, and a woman who was chosen for a night with the Emperor was not just a woman. She was a vessel for the divine lineage, a part of a sacred ritual that was as old as Japan itself. It's a bizarre and beautiful thought, isn't it? The most intimate act of human life being transformed into a public, political, and sacred one. The Emperor's children, the princes and princesses, were in a unique position. They were the future of Japan, the living proof of the divine lineage. But their lives were also a kind of gilded prison. They were secluded from the outside world, their every move watched, their every word recorded. They were not allowed to play with common children, and their education was a matter of intense political scrutiny. A prince who showed too much independence might be seen as a threat to the established order, and a princess who showed too much ambition might be seen as a danger to the delicate balance of power. You see a young princess now, a beautiful and clever girl who is playing in a secluded garden. She's a girl who has everything she could ever want. The finest silks, the most exquisite food, the most brilliant tutors. But she's also a prisoner. She will never know the outside world, and her life will be decided by the political whims of the men who rule Japan. She's a symbol of the immense power and the immense tragedy of the imperial court. As the sun sets on the palace, casting long, dramatic shadows across the raked gardens, you are left with the quiet understanding that the most profound dramas of human history often take place not on the battlefield, but within the walls of a single, all-powerful family, in the quiet, desperate struggle for honour and survival. The hushed, ritualised world of the imperial court gives way to the boisterous, sun-drenched atmosphere of a rural village. The silence is replaced by the joyful shouts of a crowd and the rhythmic thrum of drums. You're in a place where intimacy isn't a matter of political intrigue or sacred lineage, but a matter of community, life, and the raw, uninhibited power of the body. You're witnessing a Kanami-sai, a Shinto phallic festival, a public celebration of fertility and procreation that is a far cry from the secretive rituals of the elite classes. A mainstream historical fact of this era is that while Buddhism was the religion of the elite and the intellectual classes, Shinto was the folk religion of the common people. Shinto, with its emphasis on nature, fertility and community, was a much more direct and unapologetic celebration of the body and its creative power. The Shinto phallic festivals were not seen as obscene or pornographic. They were seen as a sacred and essential part of community life, a way to ensure a good harvest of rice and a good harvest of children. You're watching a procession now, a long winding line of men carrying a massive, brightly painted wooden phallus on their shoulders. The phallus, the mikosan, is a symbol of fertility and virility, and it is a source of immense pride for the village. The men are chanting, laughing and swaying to the rhythm of the drums, their faces a mixture of solemnity and a kind of joyful, uninhibited glee. Women are running up to the phallus, touching it, and laughing with a kind of playful abandon. They are not just participating in a ritual, they are celebrating life, community, and the raw, unvarnished power of the body. A quirky tidbit from this time is that the festivals were not just for the adults. Children would also participate, carrying smaller hand-carved phalluses, and they would be taught about the sacredness of life, the importance of procreation, and the power of the natural world. It was a kind of a sex education that was at once a sacred ritual and a public celebration, a far cry from the secretive and often shame-filled way that sex was taught in other cultures. It's a testament to the idea that for the common people of feudal Japan, the body was not something to be hidden or ashamed of. It was something to be celebrated, revered, and a source of immense pride. Historians still argue whether the Shinto phallic festivals were a form of religious devotion or a kind of social release valve. Some scholars believe that the festivals were a way for the common people to express their spiritual beliefs in a way that was both communal and deeply personal. They were a way to feel connected to the gods, to nature, and to each other. Others argue that the festivals were a way for a society, which was often very strict and very formal, to let loose, to have a party, and to forget their troubles for a few days. The truth, as is often the case, is probably a combination of both. The festivals were a sacred ritual, but they were also a damn good party. The festivals were also a time of matchmaking and courtship. A young man and a young woman who were interested in each other might use the festival as a way to get to know each other, to flirt and to test their compatibility. The atmosphere of playful abandon and uninhibited joy was a perfect backdrop for a bit of innocent romance, and many a marriage was said to have been born out of a moment of shared laughter and a whispered word in the middle of a festival. It's a beautiful thought, isn't it? The most solemn rituals of the village also being the most romantic. The festival would culminate in a great feast, a shared meal of rice, sake, and 1,000 different delicacies. The entire village would gather together, and they would eat, drink, and be merry. The feast was a symbol of community, of shared prosperity, and of a shared commitment to a life of abundance and joy. It was a moment of grace, a moment of connection, and a moment of pure, unadulterated happiness. The cult of the phallus and the Shinto phallic festivals are a powerful reminder that not all of feudal Japanese society was a world of strict codes and brutal punishments. There was also a world of joy, a world of community, and a world of a raw, uninhibited celebration of life. The phallus in this world was not a symbol of male dominance or patriarchal power. It was a symbol of life, of creation, and of a shared commitment to the future. It was a sacred object, a powerful totem, and a source of immense pride and joy. You're watching a young woman now, her face flushed with sack and her eyes bright with laughter. She has just touched the miko-san, and she's a woman who has a secret. She's pregnant. She has not told anyone yet, but she knows. The festival is not just a party for her, it is a prayer, a moment of thanks, a celebration of the life that is growing inside of her. As the sun sets and the drums fade into the night, you're left with the quiet understanding that the human desire for life, for connection, and for community is a force that is as old as Japan itself, a force that is as sacred as it is powerful, a force that will not be denied. The joyful cacophony of the Shinto festival fades into a soft, murmuring hush. The rhythmic drums are replaced by the gentle splash of water, and the boisterous crowd gives way to the quiet intimacy of a communal bathhouse. You're leaving the public celebration of the body for a more private, but no less revealing, look at a different kind of public intimacy. This is the world of the Sento, the communal bathing houses of feudal Japan, a place where a surprisingly casual attitude toward nudity and the body coexisted with a strict social hierarchy. A mainstream historical fact of this era is that public bathing was a central part of daily life. Most homes, especially in the crowded cities, didn't have private baths. The Sento were not just a place to get clean, they were a social hub, a place where people from all walks of life could gather, talk and relax. They were a bit like a modern-day coffee shop, a place where business deals were made, gossip was exchanged and friendships were forged. You're standing at the entrance to a Sento now. It's a bustling place, with a steady stream of people going in and out. There's a small attendant at the entrance, a woman with a kind smile, who is taking a few coins from the people who enter. Inside, it's a world of steam, wood, and the murmur of 100 different conversations. The air is thick and humid, and the smell of soap and wet wood is everywhere. The bathhouse is divided into two sections, one for men and one for women. But in many of the smaller rural bathhouses, the baths were often mixed. A quirky tidbit from this time is the surprisingly casual attitude toward nudity. People would walk around the bathhouse completely naked, without a hint of shame or embarrassment. The body was not seen as something to be hidden or ashamed of. It was a natural part of life. This is a stark contrast to the Western cultures of the time, where a glimpse of a naked ankle was considered scandalous. In feudal Japan, nudity was simply a fact of life, a part of the everyday routine. It's a testament to the idea that a culture's attitude toward the body is a deeply ingrained and often completely unconscious part of its worldview. Historians still argue whether the communal baths were a sign of a society's deep-seated comfort with the body or a pragmatic solution to a lack of resources. Some scholars believe that the public baths were a sign of a more communal, less individualistic culture, a culture where the body was seen as a shared rather than a private experience. They point to the fact that people from all social classes would often bathe together, a rare moment of social equality in a highly stratified society. Others argue that the public baths were simply a matter of necessity, that a lack of resources and a lack of space meant that people had no choice but to bathe together. The truth is probably a combination of both. The baths were a pragmatic solution, but they were also a reflection of a culture that was in many ways more comfortable with the body than many others. The Sento were also a place of social hierarchy. While people from all classes might bathe in the same water, the samurai and the wealthy merchants would often have private rooms, or they would have a special time of day when they could use the bathhouse alone. The social order of the outside world was not completely forgotten, but in the communal water a kind of temporary equality was often achieved. It's a beautiful thought, isn't it? The lord and the peasant, both naked and vulnerable, sharing the same space, the same water, and the same humanity. The bathhouse was also a place of casual intimacy. A man might wash his friend's back, a mother might bathe her grown son, and a woman might gossip with her neighbour while she scrubs her back. The physical closeness of the bathhouse was not seen as a sexual act. It was seen as a sign of friendship, of community, and of a kind of quiet, physical affection that was a natural part of life. It's a very different kind of intimacy than the formal, ritualized encounters of the shogun's uku. This was a kind of intimacy that was born of a shared experience, a shared vulnerability, and a shared commitment to a life of quiet dignity. The Sento were a world that was at once public and private, intimate and casual. They were a world that celebrated the body in all its forms, and they were a world that was, in its own way, a testament to the quiet dignity and resilience of the human spirit. They were a place where people could come together, not as samurai or as merchants or as peasants, but as human beings, and they were a place where the social hierarchies of the outside world were, for a few quiet moments, forgotten. You're watching an old man now, his body a roadmap of a lifetime of hard labour, sitting in the warm water, his eyes closed in a moment of pure bliss. He is a man who has lived a hard life, a man who has known poverty and suffering, but in this moment he is a man of peace. The water is a balm for his weary muscles, and the quiet company of his neighbours is a balm for his weary soul. The cento is a place of peace, a place of rest, and a place of quiet dignity. As the steam rises and the conversations fade, you're left with the quiet understanding that the most profound secrets of a culture are often not found in the grand pronouncements of the elite, but in the quiet, intimate moments of everyday life. The gentle hum of the bathhouse fades into the night, and you find yourself on a quiet, moonlit path. The air is cool and still, and the only sound is the rustle of your own footsteps. You're leaving the world of the living and entering a world of ghosts, of folklore, and of the passions that were so powerful they could not be contained by death. This is the world of the Gokon, the ghost stories and urban legends that surrounded passionate love, jealousy, and the horrific consequences of breaking a taboo. A mainstream historical fact of this era is that ghost stories, or kaiden, were a popular and respected genre of literature. They were not just simple horror stories, they were morality plays, stories that warned people about the dangers of greed, of jealousy, and of breaking a social taboo. The ghosts in these stories were not just vengeful spirits, they were a form of supernatural justice, a way for the powerless to get their revenge on the powerful, and a way for the cruel to face the consequences of their actions. You're standing in a quiet, secluded graveyard, the tombstones casting long, distorted shadows in the moonlight. You're hearing a story now, a whispered legend about a young woman who was madly in love with a samurai. The samurai, however, was in love with another woman. The young woman, in a fit of rage and despair, took her own life, but her spirit, her onryo, could not rest. Her ghost, a terrifying figure with long black hair and a face a mask of silent rage, began to haunt the samurai and his new love. She would appear in their dreams, she would whisper their names in the dead of night, and she would drive them mad with fear. This wasn't just a ghost story, it was a warning, a tale about the dangers of an unrequited love and the horrific consequences of a broken heart. A quirky tidbit from this time is the belief that ghosts were not just scary. They were also a source of a strange kind of entertainment. People would gather together to tell ghost stories, and they would compete to see who could tell the scariest one. It was a kind of a public theatre, a way for people to face their fears together and to laugh at the terrors that lurked in the dark. It's a hilarious and horrifying thought, isn't it? A group of friends sitting in a circle in the moonlight, trying to scare each other to death. Historians still argue whether the ghost stories were a form of social control or a form of social rebellion. Some scholars believe that the stories were a way for the powerful to keep the powerless in line. They would tell stories about ghosts who punished people for breaking the rules, and they would use the fear of the supernatural to maintain the social order. Others argue that the ghost stories were a form of rebellion, a way for the common people to get their revenge on the samurai and the wealthy merchants who had oppressed them. They would tell stories about a ghost who came back to haunt a cruel lord, and they would use the stories to express their anger, their frustration, and their longing for a kind of justice that they could not find in the living world. The ghost of the Gokon, the vengeful spirit of a jealous lover, was a particularly popular figure. This was a ghost who was not just angry. She was a woman who had been betrayed, a woman who had been wronged, a woman who had been denied her love. Her anger was a kind of righteous anger, a rage that was so powerful it could not be contained by death. She was a symbol of a different kind of power, a power that came not from a sword or a family name, but from the raw, unvarnished power of a broken heart. The ghost stories were also a way for people to talk about things that were otherwise unspeakable. A woman who had been betrayed might not be able to talk about her pain in the living world, but she could tell a story about a ghost who came back to haunt her unfaithful husband. A man who'd been wronged by a powerful lord might not be able to get his revenge in the living world, but he could tell a story about a ghost who came back to punish the lord. The ghost stories were a kind of a therapy, a way for people to express their emotions and their frustrations in a way that was safe and anonymous. The ghost stories of the Gokon were a testament to the idea that love, passion, and jealousy were not just personal emotions. They were a force of nature, a power that was so immense it could transcend death. The ghosts in these stories were a reminder that the past was never truly dead, that the secret sin could never truly be buried, and that a broken heart could never truly be healed. You're walking through the graveyard now, and you feel a shiver run down your spine. You're not just hearing a story, you're walking through it. The moon is casting long, distorted shadows, and every rustle of the leaves sounds like a whispered name. You're a little bit scared, but you're also a little bit thrilled. This is a world where the line between the living and the dead is blurred, a world where the past is never truly dead, and a world where the most horrific practices of feudal Japan, the ones that were born of a broken heart and a shattered dream, are still a living, breathing part of the night. So, as you settle in, and the echoes of these stories fade, remember that the history of this remarkable land wasn't just made of shoguns and samurai, but of the countless ordinary people whose lives were shaped by these customs. Their stories, both the public and the private, the celebratory and the horrific, are the true tapestry of a nation. We've journeyed through a world where intimacy was a matter of state, a subject of art, and a source of both immense joy and immense tragedy. We've seen a society that was at once deeply conservative and surprisingly liberal, a world that was both brutal and beautiful. The ghosts of this world, the spirits of the jealous lovers and the heartbroken wives, still whisper their stories on the wind. Now, as the final moonbeam fades from your window and the soft background hum of your fan lulls you to sleep, let those whispers become a part of your dreams. Let the stories of the shogun's inner sanctums, the geisha's art, and the samurai's forbidden love become a part of your subconscious. Let the ghosts of the past become a part of your present, and let the quiet dignity of 1,000 lost souls become a part of your own peaceful night. The past is not just a place we visit, it's a part of who we are. Sweet dreams.